Welcome to OETC and Microsoft's M365 Onboarding webinar series. I'm Stephen Yamada with OETC's communications team. Today's session will cover M365 integrations with Google products and will be presented by Eric Orman and Sam Buckhalter, technical specialists on the USA education team at Microsoft. This session is being recorded and we will send it out early next week. I'm also going to take a quick moment to highlight OETC's renewals team, some of whom are on today's webinar. If you have any licensing questions, you can reach out to help@oetc.org, and someone from the team will be happy to assist you. With that, hand it over to you first, Eric.
All right, thank you very much. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, just fine.
Okay, all righty. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm back again here to talk about Teams and Google. And so I get a lot of these questions. My primary area is California and Hawaii. I've been backfilling in the Northwest in the education sector. And, you know, there's a lot of momentum around Teams, you know, not only for meetings, but for chat, for collaboration, for telephony seems to be the biggest one also. And so some organizations are using you know, Microsoft identities, you know, with full Office and everything, Exchange for teachers and faculty, but their students are using Gmail and Chromebooks. And so I get a lot of questions around how does Google and how do Teams, do they play nice or don't they? What are the nuances? How can we make this scenario work? And so that's what we wanted to spend today's talking about is what are all those nuances? What are those gotchas? What are those integration points and what things work and what things don't? And so just educating you on that, because ultimately at the end of the day, I personally feel that Teams provides a great experience that far exceeds any others when it comes to being able to more effectively communicate through chat, better able to host particular meetings, the telephony support within that, and then ultimately the collaboration, because Teams is your collaboration hub, and you got to think about it in those four different buckets. I'm joined today with Sam Buckhalter. He is our identity guru, and so him and I are going to be trading off on this session. So our agenda for today, I'm going to initially frame out. I guess I already did, kind of what the goal of it is. Sam's going to talk a lot about the identity pieces of this, because there's the M365 identity. So what's in Azure Active Directory or what's in your Active Directory, because in order to access Teams, you got to have a Microsoft identity in order to do that. But what happens if you have students or faculty and staff or other people in Gmail? Can they bring their own identity? How can they leverage that identity? And so Sam's going to talk about all of those different nuances of those particular pieces. Once he's done, then I'll talk about more of you know, the nuances of Teams and how Teams and Google interact, how to use guest access, talk about Chromebook integration, and how Teams on Chromebook works. And so then we'll wrap that up. And so we'll probably have about 10 minutes left at the end of the session where people can unmute your microphones. In the meantime, I would just simply ask for you to use the chat, and Sam and I and the rest of the team will be moderating that. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and, well, I'm going to recap at the end these best practices, because that's kind of where they're at. So I'm just going to jump right into the identity pieces of this. And I'm going to turn it over to Sam and let him introduce himself and talk more on the identity parts of this.
Perfect. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Buckhalter. I'm a Microsoft 365 technical specialist. I focus on security, compliance, and for today, identity. Wanted to talk a little bit about complexities and maybe some challenges or struggles you may be facing or might come up in the near future as you're using a plethora of different systems and trying to integrate those together, specifically for today within Google and Microsoft, and what your landscape might look like today, and how we can not only further improve that, but improve the end user experience as well as security, but make it all a much more simplistic platform to connect those systems together. So talking a little bit, today, you're probably managing Google and Microsoft environments very differently, or at least separately. you might fall into a couple different categories of synchronization or number of accounts that you have between the different platforms. In a lot of instances, you might have a Google Connect synchronization service that's syncing your on-premises Active Directory identities up to Google. Or maybe you don't have students or your Google users in on-prem AD today, and you're provisioning them directly to Google, creating kind of a disjoint experience from the rest of your accounts. Whereas you might have a synchronization service connecting from on-premises Active Directory up to Azure Active Directory. We call that at Microsoft Azure AD Connect, or AAD Connect for short. So the point being is you're managing a lot of different identities in different places, and we want to go ahead and simplify that. So Azure Active Directory is a full-fledged identity provider. It supports all the big protocols, SAML, OAuth, OpenID Connect, to allow you to connect in third-party services like Google to it and give you that unique and good integrated experience between those platforms. So you're likely in a handful of different scenarios, one of which no students in Active Directory, only in Google. So you're provisioning accounts in Google. You might have separate accounts. Maybe it was self-service sign up in Azure AD at one point, and trying to go forward to consolidate and simplify that. Another solution would be where you have the students in AD and you have kind of like this picture depicts. You've got a sync agent, one going to Google, one going to Azure AD. They both have the same username and password, but you're still syncing and managing them in two different locations. And then lastly, the best solution is where you really just have one username and password, and that is giving you that consistent experience across platforms and able to synchronize it to one location and have it proliferate to other services from there. So with that, Eric, can you forward me to the next slide, please? I wanted to talk a little bit about those integrations with Azure AD. So this is what the world could look like as you perform the integrations. And we'll go through this. I'll hop out of PowerPoint in a minute here, and we'll walk through this live. I can show you how easy and quick it is to set these configurations up. But this is a good walkthrough of how Azure AD can integrate as that identity provider, not just for the Microsoft world, but for third-party SaaS apps, for your other cloud services, whether you're using Google Cloud or AWS or any other services out there that support SAML, OAuth, OpenID Connect. But even your on-premises legacy applications, being able to use the same mechanism, the same unified identity to connect to on-prem and not need VPNs and enhanced security, even for applications that don't inherently natively support it. So here we are, we're looking at your Active Directory, where you would have your user accounts generally, your student accounts, and how it synchronizes to Azure AD with our utility. Again, it's called Azure AD Connect. So identity originates potentially from your student information system or other HR system, would be provisioned into Active Directory, synchronized up to Azure AD. You can kind of think of them as just an extension of one another. And then from Azure AD, you're able to leverage the connectivity to those third-party those Microsoft apps, as well as, again, those legacy on-prem apps, and wrap all of that with the same experience, the same level of security, the same customization across the board to give you that best case user platform where it's all unified. So we'll go one more slide, Eric. And here's how that would look. So we have our users signing in. You can leverage Microsoft Azure conditional access in order to control, like a firewall rule, who has access to what apps and in what scenarios, from what locations, from what devices, whether you need to require MFA or not. You can get very granular, and all of that, all of the security from Azure AD conditional access can be the applications you connect to Azure AD, and that's what I'm about to show you in 1 minute here. But again, it's all of those cloud apps, Microsoft or not. It's your legacy apps you've connected with an app proxy, or it's any of the custom apps you've connected that do support those open protocols. So with that, I thought I'd show it to you in the real world, and we can kind of dive in and take a look at that. So hopefully everyone here is very familiar with this interface. This is the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back down to this Azure Active Directory Admin Center. And that's going to pop me over to here in Azure AD. And from here, we have a few options. It's simplified when you're going just to the AAD Admin Center. But we're going to go look at our enterprise apps. Enterprise apps, those are the applications you've connected to Azure Active Directory to do things like single sign-on and do user provisioning and such. So for today, we're going to look at Google. How do we connect Google to Azure AD and the rest of your environment? And so we can simply go ahead and click this new application. From here, at the very top, you notice there's a create your own application. You can build your own application to open standards and leverage this single sign-on capability with it. We can search applications that are in our pre-built or predefined in our app catalog. There's close to 4,000 or so apps already in there. However, there's millions of apps that use open standards that are connected to Azure Active Directory. So we can go look and search for our application, or we can hop down. And I mentioned Azure App Proxy. This is how you publish those on-prem apps or those legacy apps to allow you connectivity and treating on-prem legacy apps like they're cloud apps, including providing them that same level of security that you're providing everything else in your cloud infrastructure. So you can go down here and add your on-prem apps and deploy Azure App Proxy. Very simplistic process, out of the scope for today's call, but really cool functionality to read up on or ask questions about at a later time. So I'm going to hop back up. We're going to add Google Workplace today to our Azure AD. So I'm just going to do a quick search for Google. It's down here a little bit, but we've got our Google Cloud G Suite connector by Microsoft. So we're going to go ahead and click this connector. I'm going to give it a name. We'll just call it G Suite Demo. And we're going to go ahead and just simply click the Create button, and it's going to add this application to Azure Active Directory. Give it 1 second. From there, we'll go ahead and we'll go back to the application. Now we can configure it. So we have our G Suite here that we've added, and we're going to go ahead and launch that and configure the properties and attributes about this application and ultimately connect it in for single sign-on. So right here under properties, there's a couple quick settings to note. User assignment required. Really, this is determining whether this application is open and available to everyone in your environment, or if you want to give a specific assignment. In this case, we are going to require the assignment and make it visible to those users. So to do that, we're going to hop over to users and groups, and you can add in your users. I've got 2 in here already. You can add other users that you want to be able to leverage the Google environment and leverage single sign-on from Azure AD into Google. And so you can select groups of people or individual users as necessary to provision and allow them access into that application. Next, we have our provisioning. So we have our account in on-prem AD. We've synchronized that account from on-prem AD to Azure Active Directory using AAD Connect. Now that account has a representation in Azure AD. Now the big piece is how do we get that account synchronized over to Google without having to deploy any other infrastructure, without having to have a specialized Google connector where you can kind of keep that workflow all consistent from the same source. So we can do that by going to the provisioning tab. And from provisioning, I've got it set up. I'm going to go do edit provisioning. And if we look at our settings here, we have our scope. So we can say who is synchronized as a Google user. I have it set up as sync only assigned users and groups. That goes back to what we just did, selecting the users that are allowed to use the Google application. So we're only going to synchronize those people we want to provision Google services to. You could, of course, do all users and groups in your environment or customize this as necessary. So as you can see, we had 2 users reassigned, And we have 2 users synchronizing from Azure AD over to Google without any Google synchronizing agent at all. This is all handled from Azure Active Directory and the connections into Google Suite. Now, we want to enable the sign-in behavior. We don't want people to have to put their username and password in 16,000 times in every pop-up window that comes up to them. We want to enable single sign-on from the Microsoft world into the Google world so that you have that same user experience and you have that same security stature for all of your applications, Microsoft or Google or other third-party that you've connected in. So we'll go to the single sign-on tab here. And actually, I'm going to go back. I'll do change sign-on method. So when you're setting it up new for the first time, you'll see these options. You can disable single sign-on. That's really, it just gives you a link to Google. You click it, you'd have to log in again. We have our SAML. This is the richest experience to leverage for that single sign-on behavior between the platforms. Couple other options that wouldn't fit here because Google does support SAML, but you could use for like legacy on-premises apps. If you needed to do like password filling into maybe it was an app that didn't support SAML, an old app, legacy app that you're publishing, you can support password injection into that web form with password base. So other options, but for today and Google, we're going to go ahead and use the SAML single sign-on capability. And this is great. It walks you right through the steps, just 1, 2, 3, 4. You can kind of go from top to bottom. But even better, we have this configuration guide up here, a little link, and it's customized for the apps that you're looking at. So here we are. It's a tutorial, how to add Azure Active Directory single sign-on for Google Cloud or Google Suite. And it walks you all the way through, gives you the frequently asked questions, the Chromebooks and devices compatibility, that Eric's going to go over. It gives you the step-by-step things, everything I'm showing you right now, but it gives it to you in documentation with screenshots. And I love scrolling down to this bottom part. It even shows you the Google environment and what you need to do from the Google side with Google-specific screenshots. Now, looking beyond Google at everything else, if you go on the tree on the left, this is amazing. It's just alphabetized applications you can go through. These are all the apps. We have custom documentation on how to connect, whether it's Cisco WebEx or Google or Adobe Creative Cloud. It's just all alphabetized here. The extent of documentation here is amazing. And it's that same experience across the board. You're getting that custom documentation on how to connect all these different third-party apps into Azure Active Directory. So fantastic resource. We make it real quick and easy. You can go to configuration guide again. It'll take you right to the Google one since we are in a Google application connector that we're setting up. So how do you set up single sign-on? Well, we come down here. There's a few key tasks to do. So we've added the application to Azure Active Directory. We've selected single sign-on, but we need to connect the dots between Google and Azure AD. So we're going to go ahead and download this base 64 certificate. Simple little download link. It'll download that file. We'll just save it real quick. Save. So we'll get a little base 64 certificate. And then there's a handful of URLs here. We have our setup G Suite. So our login URL, our Azure AD identifier, and our logout URL. Again, all of these step-by-step instructions to walk you through it to help you along that process when you're deploying this. So we'll copy those URLs. And now we're going to hop over into the Google admin console. So I'm logged in as an administrator in Google Suite or Google Workplace. And we're just going to go from the admin console over to security. And let's just scroll down just a little bit. You see this setup single sign-on SSO with a third-party identity provider. That third-party identity provider, that would be Microsoft Azure Active Directory in this case. So we're going to go set this. Select that. And here's where you paste those URLs. We have our sign in URL and our sign out URL. Those were directly copied from here. Log in, log out. Directly copied from there. We can paste these here. And then we have a certificate upload. So you can really, I've already uploaded it here, but you can upload the certificate that we downloaded just earlier. And then you can add in your password change. So great thing here is you have a unified identity. You can leverage things like Azure AD, self-service password reset. Now users that are in Google, if they lose their credentials or forget their credentials, they have a single password reset portal they can leverage, and it resets their password in on-prem AD. It's then synchronized to Azure AD, and then that's being leveraged to connect to Google. So one password portal, one password, one place to change it. Really makes it really quick and easy. So it's as simple as, again, pasting a couple URLs, upload a certificate, and we're going to go ahead and hit save. And that enables single sign-on between Google and Azure AD. Now, what does that look like? Let me go, bear with me for one moment. I'm going to switch over to a different browser, and we'll look at the end user experience. So here we are. Okay, I've gone to myapplications.microsoft.com. I'm going to use a little 365demo.org. That's my domain. This is a domain realm so that it'll port you right to, you can use this in your link, so it'll port you right to your customized login page. And so we've got our custom Azure AD login page. I've got an image in the background you can upload and put whatever image that makes sense for you there. You can update and customize your logo. I've given a little username hint on how the format that your username should be. And then you can always add your own branding in this text box in the bottom for other information you might need to provide. So we're going to log in with my Google user at M365demo.org. So we'll log in with the Google user. Password in real quick. And this is connecting us to the My Applications portal. And this is a great experience. So you notice at the top, there's a handful of tabs. You can customize these tabs. So I've created one with school apps. So this represents a Google user that does not have Exchange, not using Microsoft email. They're using Google email, but we want to provision them for other services like Teams. So we've got Google Suite, we've got Teams, there's no other email. They can use Word, PowerPoint, Excel, etc. all right here. And because we've added Google Suite or Google Workplace as a app and enabled single sign-on, we have this here for our Google user, and they can go ahead and click that little icon, and it's going to launch Gmail for them and get connected without asking for any other permissions or credentials, and get us logged in and connected to Google email, and they can interact and work as normal. So no additional password prompts. We can go switch over and we can go to our Google Drive. They can work within their Google Drive environment and work with their documents there as necessary, all with the power of Azure Active Directory and the security that you've implemented behind it. Now, as a little bit of a teaser, I wanted to show you one advanced feature. So everything we've talked about thus far is available with Microsoft 365 A3 licensing, which is generally pretty standard licensing for our education customers, A3 or higher. But everything we've talked right now is all A3 licensing. But I wanted to show you a feature that falls under the Microsoft CASBI solution. So a CASBI is an industry term for Cloud Access Security Broker, and it's a way to protect your cloud applications, implement additional security, implement insights here into those apps you connect to it. So this is an advanced feature I'm just about to show you, but we've got Google Suite connected into Azure AD, and if you notice, there was a couple extra hops when we logged in, and it's because I've enabled Google in our CASBI, Microsoft Cloud App Security. And so it's being proxied and monitored by additional Microsoft Advanced Security to protect your content, protect your users here. And one of the big ones is I can put restrictions on what this user can do in Google when they're interacting in their Gmail, for example. So we have an email here. It's an email from Kara. She's back in our Exchange environment, and she sent a attachment to our Google user, a little PowerPoint. And so now we're going to go ahead and open this PowerPoint. We can see it here. We're in Google. It's opening just in the web interface. and you don't have to hop out or anything like that, but we can see this PowerPoint presentation. But let's say, hey, you know what? I want to download that and review it later. Because we've imposed some monitoring and some additional controls using Cloud App Security, when you go to the download button, again, this is inside Google email. We've configured this to block downloads of application or block downloads of attachments, so that we're only allowing the online viewing. Great example of that. You can see a little Microsoft Cloud App Security notice here saying, hey, this is being blocked because you didn't meet certain criteria. So just a little teaser, some of the really cool things you can apply and the additional security you can apply from Microsoft into the Google environment to help protect your data, your users, your content, and control when and where people can download stuff and make sure that all of that is healthy and safe. So with that, Eric, I can pass that back to you. And if there's any questions, I'll take a look at the chat window and happy to answer any after this session. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, everyone post your questions in the chat window for that, or at the end we'll actually have unmute your microphone. So I wanted to transition a little bit and start talking about, so identity is really key, like Sam said, because your end users, whether they're students or faculty and staff, having a single identity, single username, single password, regardless logging into Google or in Microsoft, is going to provide a better end user experience holistically. Azure provides better tools through conditional access in order to protect those accounts also, rather than Google does. So you're going to get a better value from not only the experience, but also from security by connecting your Google with your Azure identity, like Sam was talking about. So I wanted to transition now and start talking about Teams. So let's first lay some framework and some fundamentals around Teams. I'm coming into this session not going to explain Teams. I expect that you have a understanding, you've used Teams before, and you have a general awareness of how to use it. So from a architectural point of view, Teams integrates with three primary services. And I love this slide because for when we talk about what those are, so it's OneDrive for Business, Exchange, and SharePoint. So you see those on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side are the Teams features. So for example, chat. When you are chatting with somebody, those chats are saved in your Exchange mailbox. When you share a file through a chat, that file is shared and stored on your OneDrive for Business. If you guys already know, OneDrive for Business is your personal file storage, and you actually, for education, get unlimited OneDrive for Business storage. So when you share a file in team within a chat, it gets saved on OneDrive. If you're doing any calling, so if I do a Teams to team calling, or if you add a PSTN, those voicemails are stored in your Exchange mailbox. And then meetings, if you do any scheduling of a meeting, you book a meeting with somebody, that is all handled and stored in Exchange. And then when you create a team, kind of a couple of things happen within that. One is it creates it used to create an Office 365 group. They rebranded it. It's actually called a Microsoft 365 group. That does all the permissionings and such. But on the back end for file storage, it actually creates a. And so those are, the Teams front end. So a lot of people just don't understand how those map to back end services. And you don't need to configure any of those back end services. It just automatically works. But there's some nuances. So in this world that we live in, where your students might be using Gmail and they are using email on Gmail, how do you enable Teams to give them access while still being able to use chat and all those other things? So let's talk about this, because if I disable Exchange, what that effectively means is my voicemails are not being stored. My meetings, how do I schedule meetings? Because I don't have calendaring. Are my chats persisted? Do I get to keep those? And so on your screen, you're able to see those big X's. And so talking through each of those particular pieces, I created a cool little table up there in the top right corner. So let's dive into that. So your chats will persist. In fact, we actually create this Fanta, they call it a Fanta mailbox in the back end. But basically there is an Exchange mailbox, but it's only, I don't know, they call it a Fanta mailbox. But in short, if you have Exchange disabled, your chats will persist. So you'll be able to continue to do chatting. Calendaring and bookings and meetings, basically that's not going to exist completely, but there are some additional things that you can actually do. So the calendar icon in Teams won't show up. So if you're familiar with Teams, you have the different the icons, the apps on the left-hand side. When Exchange is disabled, that icon does not exist, and you don't have access to book meetings from Teams. But you can book meetings using the new Google add-in, and I'm actually going to show you that. So live events. So there are two types of events in Teams. Here, like the one that we're in right now is we just call that a normal meeting. You can have up to 300 people in that. That'll soon be expanded out to 1,000 using the new advanced communication SKU license. But if you want something broader than that, we have what we call a live event, and that is more of a webinar type live stream. Think of that as you would use it for board meetings, you would use it for graduations and such, and that allows you to have 10 presenters, and you can have up to 20,000 people watching that event. And so those people watching it, it's just a live stream. It's like Netflix. You're just watching it. You can't interact. You do get a Q&A, but you don't get to unmute your microphone and interact with those presenters. So the presenters are just the people that are producing the event, and it's being live streamed out from that. Voicemail, we already talked about that. Voicemail will not work. I forgot to mention live events. So there's kind of two different types of live events. There's a Teams live event, and there's a Stream live event. So you are allowed to create a Stream live event. There are some differences between a Teams live event and a Stream live event. I'll provide a link. Well, actually, there's a link up in here that you can't click on, of course. But I'll post it here in the chat that kind of talks about what those differences are, so you can understand them. Well, I'm sure share this content, but I put it in the chat there that describes the difference between a Stream live event and what a Teams live event provides you. You get similar in terms of the scale and the numbers and the experience. There's a couple of other smaller nuances in there, so just be advised. But you do get that capability of those big webinars, within that point of view. So that's from an architectural perspective. So chats, Exchange mailbox disabled, you still get chats, but you don't get voicemails. Meetings is kind of problematic. So let's talk a little bit more about that. There is a great document out there. It's Enabling Teams for Education. So if I click on that, it's going to open that document up and talk about everything that I'm talking about right now. And it goes into great detail about what works, what doesn't. I'm kind of hitting the top big items about what's going on. I'm going to, again, paste this in the chat for you guys so that you have the immediate link for this. But that's a great document that walks over these. The biggest issue is really around the calendaring. And it's when you have Exchange disabled, you can't create meetings in Teams. So that means within the Teams application, you can't create a meeting. But you can if you use the Google add-in for this. And so I'm going to show you this, and I'm also going to demo it. In fact, I got quite a few demos. So this Teams add-in, so if you're logged on to your Google account, you can come in here. I've already got it installed in mine, and you can install it. But what this provides, and let me hop over and show this. So just so that you guys can easily get there, I will post a link for this add-in. It goes directly to this page so that you can add that add-in in. So let me hop out and go to, and again, I have a lot of demos, so I have to be switching screens. So if I'm going too fast, let me know. I kind of talk fast and go fast, but I got to do some context switching here in terms of some of the screens that I have. So The first example that I have here is I'm at Bing. I am a user. I'm going to go to office.com. I can log in here. Marie is the person logged in. And on the left-hand side, you see that I have Teams, but I don't have the Outlook icon. That means Exchange is disabled. But I am able to log into Teams. And you'll notice over here on the left-hand side, I don't have the calendar icon because Exchange is disabled. But my chats are here, so I was chatting with Bill. I still can get to Teams that I have. I can still get to assignments, if you're using those. Calls, if I go to voicemail, it's going to tell me right here, we can't get your voicemail right now. And the reason is because Exchange is the content repository for my voicemail. And because Exchange is disabled, I can't get to my voicemail. I can't set that up, so that's expected. And then files. I could get to my OneDrive files within here. And actually, just to quickly show you, you can actually add a link to Google Drive. So down at the bottom, you can click Add Storage. And in fact, we give you these options to connect to others. I've already set up Google Drive. I logged into it, and on the right hand side here, you could see there's some files in Google Drive that I'm able to get to. So I can even open up these particular files, host it in Google, but I'm actually able to open them up within Teams and look at those particular files, which is pretty cool. So whether it's a Word document or it's a PowerPoint presentation on Australia, this student made one for this. It's actually what my daughter made. She's in 2nd grade. Hosted on there. You can also move files between your Google Drive. So if I click on it and I click Move, I can actually move it to a team or a channel, or I can move it to OneDrive. I could just simply say Move, and it's going to spin up here in the top right. It says Uploading. And now, it's gone out of my Google, and now it's over right in my OneDrive. So you can actually transfer stuff from your Gmail over to your OneDrive, and then from there you can open it up within the full Office. So now I'm actually able to open up that Australia file within Teams, getting all the capabilities within Office on that to edit that PowerPoint presentation and such. So you get all the power of Office with the web view. And of course, if you have the desktop app, you can choose right here to open up in the desktop app. So that is kind of files and kind of the tour over here of that. So calendar is not enabled. So how do I book a meeting? So I've logged in Marie with her Google account. I'm going to go to calendar. And I've already added that plugin that I was showing you earlier, that I gave you a link to that. And so in here, there's a meeting. I could click on create an event, and I could say, OETC demo meeting. And in here, you could pick your date and times for everything. And it says add Google Meet video conferencing. Well, I did the drop down, and right here, I get the option of creating a Microsoft Teams. I've already added that add-in. You will have to go through a couple prompts when you log in to configure that. But effectively, this is already added, and then I can add various guests in here. Eric at duvalschool.onmicrosoft.com. That was the test one that I was doing. And it's going to be a Microsoft Teams event. And I click Save. Yes. And so even though Marie did not have Exchange, as we showed it over here, it's disabled for that particular user, she was able to actually book a meeting using that Google Calendar. So that's a way that you can get around not having Exchange enabled, but still being able to create that. So there are a couple of nuances with this. So I've showed you that if you're using Teams over here, and you have your channel. So there's this general channel. If I actually create a meeting over here, so if I meet, no, I didn't want to do that. What? Block. Great. So if I go to Teams, I don't have the ability to create one. Darn, there's so many demos. But if I were to create a meeting, a channel meeting, like if your teacher was, they will not show up in Google Calendar. So in fact, if anybody schedules a meeting in Teams and you don't have Exchange enabled, you will never get that meeting invite in Google. So it's one way. The only way to do booking of a Teams meeting and in order to get that calendar invite is to book it in Google, just like I showed you. That's the only way. So that effectively limits the usage of creating meetings in Teams and channels, at least booked meetings. The users can always come here, see the meeting down here, and click on it and join it, but they're not going to get that meeting added to their Google Calendar. So what that means is if you have teachers that are using channel meetings, it's never going to be in their Google Calendar over here. You have to book it in the Google Calendar. So a couple of nuances on that. Both channel meetings and normal meetings will not show up. So you have to book them in Google in order to see Google. I think that's the easiest way of thinking about that. You got to book them in Google in order to see them in Google. If they're booked in Teams, they will not show up in Google. So easy way of thinking about that. There's a lot of nuances. I did a lot of testing on this because there's no documentation that kind of goes over all of this. So the information I'm providing you guys is, what I've tested and what I've observed and what I've verified through kind of obscure documentation. So that's the experience in terms of meetings. There's some additional things that I wanted to talk about. There is a cool solution that Foresight, who is a partner, built in order to get that calendar icon. A really great screenshot, but in the bottom right-hand corner, they have built a solution where they will add your Google Calendar as part of a Teams app. As you guys know, there's lots of apps that you can add to Teams, Planner, there's a whole ecosystem. And basically what they have is their solution, which will open up the Google Calendar, and you can do all the booking and everything. So you get kind of that experience like having it in Teams, but it's still using the Google on that. And so there's also a third solution where you can enable Exchange, but disable email. I'm not going to go into the details of that. There's quite a few blogs out there of how to do it. There's no official documentation from Microsoft to do that, but it is possible by setting various rules in Exchange to disable email. Again, I'm not going to cover that, but I want to show you that view of what works, what doesn't. So that's Exchange disabled, that column. Like we talked about chats. Yes, chats work. Do I get a calendar app in Teams? No, you don't, because I showed you that. Can you book a meeting? Can you book a live event? I say yes with an asterisk. You got to understand that you got to book them in Google in order to do that. Live event, you can't book a Teams live event, but you can use Stream live event. You could participate in a live event, but you cannot book it. I think that's the key. So participate, and maybe I should have added that there. You can participate, but you can't book, which means you can't be the producer. So somebody else in your organization that has Exchange has to have that capability. Voicemail, no. So that middle column, so that's Exchange disabled. Middle column, Foresight, Exchange disabled. They added those two capabilities where you can, that calendar app into Teams. You can go out to Foresight, they call it Calendar Connect, and work with them, or I could give you a referral to them. It's a pretty cool solution. It recently was released. I'm not going to talk in greater detail or demo it. I'll leave that to them for that. And then the third option was Exchange enabled, but mail disabled. And as you can see, that allows everything in that sense of it. And again, that I'm not going to show, but effectively what you do is you create some rules that blocks emails for that particular piece of it. And so that gives you a comparison across the board. Was there any questions that I missed? That was a whole lot of information to kind of go through. Was there any specific questions? I see there's a lot of things around OneDrive on there. I'm just browsing this. Nope, looks like it's pretty straightforward. So I'm going to continue on. Here are some gotchas. I already talked about these. I think the bottom one, where any meetings created in Teams will not show in Google Calendar if users have Exchange Online disabled. So channel meetings, normal meetings, I talked about that. So created in Google will be seen in Google. So that was kind of my motto in talking about that. So guest access. So that's kind of normal users. Guest access is where you can invite people externally to your organization, into your organization. They're guests. So this works really well in the sense of you have people that are not, associated with your school district. They might be volunteers. They might be, PTA. There could be lots of use cases where you invite people external to your full-time faculty and staff into your school in order to participate in meetings. The value of guest access is that you get to come in as an authenticated user, so not as anonymous users. So in Teams, there's kind of three layers. You're a full member of your organization, you're a guest user, or you're an anonymous user. So those are the three breakdowns of those particular. And so a lot of organizations don't like to have just anonymous people into their organization or join meetings. They want them to come in as authenticated. Or as a guest, you're part of that PTA or volunteers. You might be using Google. How do you come in as an authenticated user? Because the school district won't give you a username and password from the school district. So it's more or less bring your own identity. Now, with guest access, you can bring in, of course, an Azure Active Directory identity. So like if you're in another tenant, like me, Microsoft.com, I can be invited into your tenant as a guest, and I can authenticate and actually switch between tenants. Google, you could bring them into that. The other one was Microsoft accounts, so like consumer accounts. So if you have a Hotmail account, a Live, an MSN, what was the other one? Yeah, those, or Outlook.com. You can actually add those people, and they could use their Microsoft account to log in order to get access. So up until a couple months ago, it only allowed Microsoft identity. Now they have where you can add Google as the social identity provider. And what that allows is right there in the blue, people to log in to Teams using their Google identity for guest access. So let me show you how to set that up. So I'm going to hop back out. I'm going to come back over to, different browser. Different browser. Like I said, I've got a whole bunch of these. So I'm here at my admin center. If I come down to Azure Active Directory, this is where you would configure it. I come to Azure Active Directory, and if I go to external identities in here, so this is where you manage guest access, external identity collaboration. This is where you can specify who can invite people as guests into your organization. And primarily the way that people get invited in as guests is so that they can interact with a team and get added to that. In here is where you could adjust those knobs and dials for that, where admins and people with a guest inviter role can add. Of course, I would set that to yes. Members can invite. It's an iffy thing. Some people say no, and then of course guests can invite. Most people set that to no, and so this is the general three settings where only administrators or guests can invite. That's kind of the recommended way of doing that. But how you configure those social identity providers is you come up to identity providers, and I've already configured the Google, but you can configure Facebook also. When you click on one of these, like the Facebook one, there'll be a link to the documentation up here. It took me about 15, 20 minutes to configure it for Google. I haven't gone through the Facebook one yet, but there's the Google that's configured there. And what is that experience that you get out of that? So let me show you that. So if I have this particular account, I need to hop to a different in private browser session. So if I go to teams.microsoft.com, I may have to log out of the current user. Yeah, hold on just a sec. It kept me logged in. Okay, so if I'm using the web browser, I'm here. I just went to teams.microsoft.com, and I could input my Google user account, and I click Next. And this is kind of a horribly written screenshot. It says, we couldn't find your account with that username. Try another, or we invite you to join an organization, or sign in with a one-time passcode sent to your email. It doesn't really say like they couldn't find you. It's misleading. So you can click one-time passcode, and that's going to send me a one-time passcode to my email. So I'm not going to show you my email, but effectively it has a one-time passcode in it. I'm logging onto that right now. So I copy that over, and I'm going to sign in. And so it authenticated me to Azure AD for a second through that one-time passcode. Now it's going to allow me to sign into Teams, and it's going to bring me to my Google login. So I'm going to click on my name. It's going to go through authentication. Oh, it looks like I already clicked in my demo. Yeah, I should have inputted my password, but I clicked saved. But anyway, it logged me into Teams using my Google identity. I did not have to have a Microsoft identity, and so that's really great in the terms of being able to. I'm an authenticated user using Google in order to do that. This works on Windows a lot nicer. So if you're here we are, I've remote desktop to another one. I have the Teams client installed, and I simply just logged into it. This one is a nicer experience with on Mac and Windows. It's actually, if you click sign in, it's automatically going to know give you this. It's, hey, we'll send a passcode to sign you in. So send passcode. I'm going to come back over to my email that I'm not going to show you. And I'm going to copy that passcode over to here, and that's just going to log me in. There we go. And again, I logged into Teams on that particular. Oh, it's going to prompt me again to sign in. So next. Oh, here's where I made my password. So this is, again, the Windows experience, which I think is a lot nicer. I don't know how to. Passcode. Nope. And again, it's a one-time sign-in. Again, this is great for guest access. And it's going to log me into Teams. So same thing as we had before. So that's the Windows experience. I showed you the web experience for that. So again, that's all around guest access on that particular. So let's talk about, and again, that works for web clients. It works for Windows. It works for Mac. It does not work on mobile devices yet. So it only works on those main ones. So let's talk about Chromebook. So a lot of people use Chromebooks, and you have your Google identity in Chromebook. What we found is that the web client is the primary one, but you also get an experience with the Android app on there. And so there are certain feature sets that you get with on Android. Where's it at? I have this whole bunch of windows. Hold on, I got too many of them. There it is. All right, so I am actually in a live meeting right now, and I'm sharing my screen of my Chromebook, so that way you can kind of get the experience of what you have with it. And so on this particular device, if on here, I can, of course, log into Teams on this particular device. And, of course, you get all of the experience that you would in a normal web client on that particular device. Why is it going slow? I don't know why it's going slow, but I'm in a meeting, so I'm sharing it. But I get all the capabilities through chat. I get my calendaring and everything, normal web client. But what we found is a lot of users would also install from the store the Teams client. And so you're actually running the Android Teams client, because on Chromebooks, you're able to run Android applications. And so I installed the Android Teams application on here. Let me kind of move this. And so a lot of people like to do this because there are certain feature sets available more on the Android app than the web client. And so the one that is probably I'm most excited about is blur. So being able to share your video but blur the background. That feature set will be rolling out within the next month to Android applications. That it is not available on the web client. And so for equity reasons, you can imagine, students, it's highly popular because a lot of them don't want to show the background in the environment that they're at, or there might be stories of them at McDonald's and using the Wi-Fi hotspot there because they don't have Wi-Fi at home. So just for all of the equity reasons, they don't want to be sharing their background. And so Blur is going to provide that capability to them. And so you can get these additional capabilities by installing the Android app on your particular Chrome devices. Plus, I kind of actually like to run the Android app on this. I've been tinkering around with this Chromebook because it has a more minimalistic experience. And that way, if you actually have an Android device, it has the same app and it's the same feel and the same workflows, and so you don't have to learn different ones. So I like it for a couple of different reasons on that. But that's kind of Android and Chromebook on that particular side of things. And that pretty much wraps us up at the top of the hour. The last thing I want to leave you with is kind of my best practices. So just talking with identity, going over what Sam talked about, federate your Google identity with Azure AD so you get that single sign-on experience. Consider leveraging the Android app on Chromebook for Blur and other features that don't exist on the web client. Again, Blur is going to be coming out here within the next month. Look at using, for guest access, the Google Social Identity Connector. That way, guest users, as they come into your organization, can bring their own identity. And then, if you're working in your organization and Exchange is disabled, only book meetings using the Teams Google add-in. And so those are kind of the top things that we hear, and that'll get you going in terms of the best of what Teams and Google works together on that front. So I wanted to take this opportunity that kind of ends our official presentation part of it. If you guys have questions, I'm going to go through the chat here. I hope, Sam and you guys, it looks like you've been answering the questions. That's great. If you want to unmute your microphone, feel free to do so, and we can answer questions. Sam, was there anything you wanted to reiterate or to call out?
Nope, just Russell asked a question about logging into Chrome devices with Azure AD, just kind of reiterating when you connect Azure AD to Google, that account authentication stream is connected to Azure AD. So anytime you're logging into that Google account, Azure AD is doing that authentication component.
Great. Cool.
Well, maybe while people are still formulating some questions, because I know there was a lot of great information shared, I'm going to answer one of the questions about end user training. So let me just share my screen here really quickly. So for everyone, my name is Margie Strite. I'm an Education Customer Success Manager with Microsoft. And my job is to support Microsoft customers. So there's two parts of this. So on the left side, if you have topics that you would like to have training for offered through OETC, like today's Google and M365 training, there's a survey on the left side there. If you visit aka.ms/education WS feedback or scan the QR code. We'd love to know which future trainings we can offer for you. And then to answer the question from the chat on the right side, we offer free personalized training for end users. And it's completely free for your educators, your faculty, your staff, your students, your parents, really the stakeholders that use your tools. And you can set that up by emailing me. My email is majon@microsoft.com, and I will put these pieces of information in the chat as well. But we are happy to offer you the free training. If you feel like you have maybe some one-offs that need training, I will also share a link. We have free workshops that are one-to-many that your teachers can sign up for. But I would recommend the customized workshops that we can set up with you to make sure that they have a more interactive experience. With that, though, I will pass it back to Eric and Sam for any other questions, but I wanted to just make sure I was providing that information now.
Alrighty, guys. I'll be happy to follow up on any questions that people have, but I'm going to hop off and I'm going to head to my next webinar. So there is 84 people on the next one, I guess, waiting for me to talk about Office and Office deployment. So I'm back to back today on webinars. So Renan and team, feel free to proxy me any questions that you guys have. Otherwise, have a great rest of the day, everyone.
Thanks again, Eric.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar. As a reminder, we will be sending out an email with the recording. If you have any questions, you can reach out to help@oetc.org. We'll make sure they get to the right people. Thanks again.